Thank you, Mick, for those kind words, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As has become customary, my intention is not to spend too much time talking about Randgold resources today, but rather reflect on our industry and how we're setting about trying to develop the natural resources of this great continent in Africa. Again, we are learning at this conference, every speaker that stands up, Africa is uniquely well endowed in natural resources. The question I want to address today is, however, are we doing our best to turn those resources to account optimally? By we, I mean the governments of the mineral-rich countries across the continent and the investors and the developers of those assets. Two groups of people that should be united in a common purpose, but sometimes seem like ships passing each other in the night. Governments are tempted to harvest the green shoots before the enterprise come to fruition, and the mining industry exaggerates the risk without fully addressing its internal problems. It's my hope that at this Indaba we can come to a fresh realization that our interests are closely aligned and that each is dependent on the other for success. The points I wish to make are generally applicable to all extractive industries, but I'm going to use gold mining as the example today. At the heart of a disconnect between government and capital, in this case, is the perception that the gold mining industry must be rich and prosperous because it has had the benefit of a bull run in the gold price for more than 10 years. The truth, however, is very different. In spite of the rising gold price, gold mining companies, with a few exceptions of course, have not managed to create real value. Escalating operating and capital costs are squeezing margins, as you can see in this graph. There are a number of causes for this condition, but the primary one is the steady decline in the industry's average ore grade over the past decade, as shown on this slide, despite the increase in the gold price. I think you'll all agree with me, gold is a scarce material, and despite a substantial increase in exploration budgets, most miners have not been able to replace their reserves with the same sort of quality and have consequently been forced to mine lower and lower grades, resulting in the industry processing more tons using larger and more expensive plants to produce the same amount of gold year in and year out. A study by Morgan Stanley really highlights that point, as shown on this slide. Its research showed that coupled with operating cost inflation and large increases in capital equipment and capital investments, the impact of declining grades on the industry has meant that its returns on equity or capital have not increased significantly, again, despite the rise in the gold price. The notion that the gold price must have produced windfall profits is therefore very wide off the mark. Because of this, and us as an industry constantly searching for ways to actually deliver value to our shareholders, the pursuit of quality assets is leading us away from our traditional but now depleted hunting grounds and towards emerging regions, which are much more prospective, but of course present a greater risk and consequently require higher potential returns to be able to manage that risk. These new destinations include South America, Asia, the Pacific Rim, Russia, Eastern Europe, and of course, Sub-Saharan Africa. All these regions are now competing with each other for mining investment. And while Africa has the advantage of great mineral wealth, its competitors generally have better infrastructure, greater skills pools, and more sophisticated economies. Africa, and in particular West Africa, has nevertheless had some success in attracting investors and developers, starting back some 15 years ago, of which we competed with in the early 90s. And this is what it looks like today. Clearly, there's been a great deal of new projects discovered or rediscovered in the intervening years. But not a lot of really world-class gold projects have been developed across the continent over these last 15 years. And certainly, Africa has attracted less direct fixed investment than its competitors or its competing emerging markets around the world. And today, the bulk of its mineral resources remain undiscovered. And those that have been discovered, many of them still have to be developed. With its lack of infrastructure and occasional political crisis serving as a deterrent to developers. Managing and marketing this vast mining potential is the most fundamental challenge for countries wishing to interest serious investors. To do this effectively, politicians need to first discard the common misconception that mining companies are ruthless exploiters intent on grabbing more than their fair share of the country's mineral wealth. As you can see here, mining is in fact a generator of enormous direct and indirect benefits for its host country. A study by the International Council on Mining and Metals has shown that in the lower and middle income countries endowed in minerals, mining typically accounts for up to 90% of direct fixed investment, 60% of total exports, 20% of government revenues, and up to 10% of national income. Even greater than its direct contribution to the economy is the multiplier effect its operations have downstream, creating employment, building skills, purchasing goods and services, feeding families, and uplifting communities. How's another way of showing just how much the host country benefits from its mining industry? I've taken the 3 countries in which we operate as an example. And as you can see on these charts, under their present mining codes, the governments of Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Democratic Republic of Congo actually get a substantial slice of the net revenue pie, notwithstanding the fact that we as miners and investors fund 100% of the discovery and development costs and carry all the delivery and operational risks. A further point to make is that Randgold Resources has reinvested the bulk of its share back into its new African operations. And I think that's a very important thing that miss a lot of politicians, and that is, once captured, and that goes for the industry as well, once captured, we should together try and keep the investors invested in our industry, in our continent, and not chase them away. And this is not only true of young operations in emerging economies. A Citibank study of the South African mining industry found out that 7% of the economic value it created was returned to the capital providers, while 42% went to suppliers, creating a second tier of economic benefits. 17% is paid to employees, and the government's share is 11%. So you can see the host country is already a significant, if not the main beneficiary of its mining activities. That is why it's so disturbing that there is a growing tendency among the sub-Saharan mining countries to want more without offering anything in return, with their politicians actively promoting the misconception that the miners are exploiting their hosts. If unchecked, my concern is this trend will kill or at least do some serious damage to the goose that lays the proverbial golden egg. I'll show you why. This table ranks the emerging gold-producing countries in terms of project returns. It's an internal model based on 3 million ounces with set grades and strip ratios and costs that Randgold Resources uses to evaluate fiscal regimes. And when you consider the lack of infrastructure and other disadvantages, the African countries are not doing badly at all. However, even a moderate change in their current mining codes will cause them to slip down the table and diminish their ability to compete for investment or encourage reinvestment. And it's worth noting that since Mali changed its code, there's been no new mine development in Mali. We're all run our operations on the old code. My point is there's a much better way for countries to get more from their mining industries, and that is to participate positively in the value creation process. And it would go also for investors. As we've seen only too often in the mining industry, mergers and acquisitions hardly ever deliver value to shareholders, let alone other stakeholders. And other stakeholders, I would suggest, are as important as shareholders in the development of national assets. Real value, as I believe Randgold has demonstrated over the years, is created by the discovery of multi-million ounce gold deposits and their development into profitable mines. And the same goes for base metals, oil and gas, etc. The government's role in this should be, firstly, to provide a stable, business-friendly regime that will attract, or at the very least, not drive away investors, and then to partner the mining company in the development cycle, helping to drive the project up the value curve and sharing fairly in its proceeds. The partnership concept is central to Randgold's thinking and has been crucial to our building a successful gold business in Africa. Governments are the custodians, and I would point out, not the owners of their national assets. And they are custodians of those assets not only for today, but also for generations to come. And likewise, mining companies and us as managers are the stewards of our investors' capital. Together, I would suggest we should have a common objective, which is to attract investment capable of creating real value for all the stakeholders within the countries we operate. Our respective responsibilities shown here are very easily defined, and as in the case of any close relationship, partnerships should be characterized by trust, transparency, and goodwill. Occasionally, there may be differences which stress the relationship, as we all know, and then it is incumbent on both parties to resolve the issues in the best interest of stakeholders. In the African culture, as you know, I'm sure you know by now, an Indaba is a meeting of minds where important matters are debated and agreements are reached. What better place, I would suggest, than this Indaba for us as partners to remind ourselves that we need to share a common goal and to find a mutually acceptable way forward for our industry and Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.